welcome everyone. Thank you for attending this. I'm excited because it's such a cool and fun topic to talk about mimics and being deceptive. My name's Clare Walker. I work at a couple of local nature centers around the Baltimore area. I used to work at the Department of Natural Resources with Kerry Wickstead as well. And I'm a master naturalist. But my big topic of interest that I sort of research most myself is bees and other flying insects. So you'll notice there's quite a lot of those come into play, but there's lots of exciting stuff to look forward to tonight. So hopefully you're going to enjoy this. Okay, so what are we going to talk about tonight? Well, the first thing we're going to talk about is what we're not going to cover. It's so big a topic that we are not going to talk about camouflage tonight, because a lot of mimicry really looks at camouflage, and especially camouflage of tropical insects. There's so many that can do amazing mimicry. But we are not going to cover that. So we won't be looking at things like the swallowtail caterpillar here that's looking like bird poop, because that's just a masquerade where it's pretending to be an inanimate object. We're not going to look at the really cool katydid here that's just doing an amazing impersonation of a leaf to be camouflaged up in the canopy. And unfortunately, we're not even going to talk about things like the amazing wavy leaf emerald moth here that's actually put little bits of plant matter onto its body so it can look much more closely like the plant that it's on. So it's definitely trying to deceive people, but it's trying to deceive you. It's a plant, and we're going to just focus on the ones that are trying to actually mimic another insect. So that's going to be our focus tonight. So when I'm talking about mimicry, we're going to look at how the insects do this mimicry. So when we think about mimicry, the first thing we're going to think about is usually its appearance, how it looks. But a lot of mimicry is also about behavior and also about auditory and olfactory cues. So we're going to cover all of that. So we're going to have smells and sounds. Unfortunately, we don't have smell-o-vision, but we've got lots of different sounds to listen to tonight. And then we're going to look at why insects do these different approaches to their lives. And obviously, for any animal, the most important thing is you're going to evolve to maximize your reproduction. So all of these things are things that help the insects to reproduce. And for most of them, that means avoiding being eaten, because it's really hard to reproduce when you're dead. So lots and lots of the forms is defensive. But there are some that are doing it to help them eat. So it's an aggressive form of mimicry. And then there's a few real oddballs that do mimicry for other reasons. And there's so few of those that I'm going to cover them on this page, and then we'll be moving on. So in the bottom left corner down here, this is the German cockroach. And when they mate, male German cockroaches actually give a nuptial gift to the female that they're mating with. And so juvenile cockroaches actually produce pheromones to replicate the smells of a receptive female. And this will generate any males nearby to produce this nuptial gift, and they'll give it to the juveniles. So the juveniles are actually able to deceive the males and to get this extra food source that's no cost to them, but is a cost to the male. So they're deceiving their own species. The If you've ever visited a pond on a sunny afternoon, something you probably have noticed about the Odonata is that they tend to be fairly aggressive creatures, and the males are very aggressive towards each others and towards females. And it's thought that maybe to avoid this male aggression, the sedge sprite here, a local damselfly, actually mimics some of the females, not all of them, but some females do mimic the male coloration, and this is still being studied why they do this, but it's thought that a big part of it is trying to avoid male aggression. But they're still able to mate, even the ones that do mimic males. And then finally, the bug in the top left is actually a brachnid wasp. And it's this wasp, you probably know lots of the brachnid wasps, like the famous one is one that parasitizes tobacco hornworms. But this one actually parasitizes cabbage white butterflies, so it's definitely beneficial for us. And when they mate, the females can only mate once unless another male mates with them immediately. So after mating, the male brachnid wasps then actually impersonate female brachnid wasps in order to try and deceive any other males nearby, and keep them away from the female that they've just mated with, to ensure that they're going to be the father of the offspring of that female. So yeah, some pretty crazy different forms of mimicry there. There's our brachnid wasp actually parasitizing the caterpillars. Okay, and then we're also going to look at tonight, like, how good a mimic do you have to be for your mimicry to deceive potential predators? So is this tachnid wasp bristly enough to deceive you that it might be a bumblebee? The two wasps down here, we've got a leaf walker and a plushback. Do they deceive you that they could be a wasp or a bee? And what about our long-horned locust borer up here, which is actually, of course, a beetle pretending to be a wasp? And it's really trying hard, I always think, because if you look, it's actually got a W for wasp on its back. So, trying to see if those kind of animals, do they get enough, do they fool predators enough for their deception to work? Okay, so if you're going to mimic, you have to mimic something. And the thing that you're mimicking is called the model. And most of these are animals that truly are dangerous in some form. They're either extremely distasteful, they might be toxic, they might have dangerous stings or stinging hairs. So to demonstrate these features, they have aposematic coloration, which means it's basically warning colors. And the most common warning colors are the red and black that we see here with the Florida stink bug. And then yellow and black, which is usually a sign, that you sting, to stay away from. Or the black on white of one of my favorite looking caterpillars, the turbulent caterpillar. Or if you're really going for it, oops, wrong way, then you have coloration that red and yellow and white and black, and that's really telling everybody that you taste bad and you can sting. Okay, so two of our local caterpillars with warnings. But there is a cost to being this conspicuous. You've made yourself really obvious, and not every predator is going to be deterred by whatever form of whether you taste bad or whether you sting. So there's still animals out there who have adapted to overcome those deterrents to predation. So by making yourself really conspicuous, there's a cost in terms of that things that still can eat you are going to find you easy to find. So, for every insect, it's this thing of like trying to decide, is it better to hide or to be conspicuous? And those decisions are based on where your habitat is, what life stage you're in, and the population numbers that you're found in. So the swallowtail that we looked at earlier, when they're small, it's really hard to, it's easier to hide than it is to have aposematic coloration. So lots of the small swallowtails actually do the looking like the bird poop trick. But other predators, the small stages are often cryptic, so they're hiding. And then as you get larger, some of them change to having those warning colorings. And when they looked at it for a lot of caterpillars, it depends of whether they eat thin-leaved plants or like leaves that are really big and so easy to hide in, sort of roll up and hide inside of. So obviously for this, the black swallowtail here, trying to hide behind a leaf of fennel, is a pretty hard trick to pull off. So they've like switched to having the warning coloration. But a way of getting around that is some of them, when they're young, the young all group together. So if you think of things like milkweed bugs, all the young are that bright red color and they stay in a mass. And so that gives off a really large warning. Now, another thing that can happen is that some animals, and this is one of my not local examples, I've tried to stick to just animals that you can find in the Baltimore, Washington, Virginia, area. And this is not a local animal, it's the desert locust. And at small population densities, even though they're distasteful, it's more advantageous to have a cryptic coloring that keeps you hidden. So they tend to have the green coloration. But as the density of the population increases and, the insect goes from being the grasshopper to being, once they're in really large numbers, and we change and call them locusts once they're moving around, they actually take on the aposematic coloration. Because there's such large numbers of them, they're not going to be able to hide anymore. But lots of predators, there's so many of them that a predator can eat one, learn that they're distasteful, and then avoid all the others, even though there's many, many of them around.
So Claire, we actually do have a question. I think it was from the 2 slides prior. What defenses do the turbulent Phosphila have?
Oh, that's a really good question, actually, because I did look that up, and they are obviously, with a lot of these insects, we don't actually know, because there's so many caterpillars that we haven't analyzed the poisons that are whatever chemicals it is that makes them distasteful. And so if you look up this caterpillar in the David Wagner book, I'm trying to remember which one it is. Here we go. So is that coming in? Yeah. So it's the David Wagner Caterpillars of Eastern and North America. He just says that it's assumed that it is very distasteful because of those warning colors. But we haven't done the research on it. So, and anybody that wants to do research on insects, there's always, an impossibly large number for all the research to have been done.
All right. Well, that was the only question so far, so thank you.
Okay. Right. We've looked at models and we've looked at some of the times that warning coloration works and when it doesn't. So we're going to actually, go into the main focus of the talk now by looking at the mimicry, like this amazing Syriana wasp fly that just does a great job of looking like so many of our local potter wasps. Okay, the first type of mimicry is that if you are any animal, it's much better to not get bitten on your head, because that tends to cause you to die. So if you're going to be attacked by an animal, you want to be attacked somewhere other than the most vital organs. And many of our butterflies try and deflect attacks away from their head by doing what's called automimicry or reverse mimicry, which is basically putting your head at what would be the back of you. So for the grey hair streak and all our local hair streaks, it's away from the head. And the hair streaks, have behaviours as well to reinforce this image. So usually when they sit on flowers, they actually put themselves like tail up, as it were, so that's the more obvious area to be attacked. And it really works. So Surikov in 2013 did a really great study on these hair streaks and discovered that one of the major predators for them is actually jumping spiders, birds as well, but he was able to test the theories more using jumping spiders. So he actually had a particular jumping spider and presented hair streaks to the spiders. And this particular spider had a hair streak presented to it, interspersed with other butterflies, 16 times. And all 16 times, the jumping spider would jump, try and grab, what was really the rear of the butterfly, so that it was able to escape, flying forwards. And after 16 failed attempts, the jumping spider just wouldn't even try anymore, it just gave up with frustration. And that's one of the things that's really important to remember with predators. It's if you make yourself hard to catch, they're going to, not hunt for you anymore. So that's a really important part of training potential predators. All the other types of butterfly, they tested 11 other species of moths and butterflies, and the jumping spider caught all of those successfully. So it wasn't that this was a bad jumping spider for catching butterflies. So, but as well as the having these false antennae coming out from their back wings, they actually move to make these antennae look like the tail parts look like antennae. So we're gonna watch. There we go. So, you could actually do this entire talk really just talking about butterflies, because there's so many different forms of mimicry that butterflies do. But really, there's a whole studies just on all the eye spots of butterflies. So the eye spots are working in a less sophisticated way than the hair streaks, reverse mimicry, where they're just trying to deflect attacks so that birds are more likely to try and attack these eye spots, thinking that this is where the head of the butterfly is. So some trials done by Olafsson in 2010. This is our local wood satyr. And they were looking at another woodland butterfly. And what they discovered is under high light conditions, so high visibility, it was really hard to fool the birds that they were using. It was actually some tits, because this study was done in England, so I think great tits. And you can see that most of the time, all but once, the birds knew exactly where that head was, and they're not fooled by those eye spots. When they made light levels really low, interestingly enough, the birds were still pretty reliable at discovering where the head was. But in a particular type of lighting, which was low lighting but with high amounts of UV light, which is actually the type of lighting that you're going to find in the understory of woodland areas, then these eye spots are effective at deflecting the attacks. And these kind of butterflies, their wings are designed to break easily, so that the bird will just be left with a bite full of wing, and the butterfly flies away to see another day. Now, on some of our larger ice butterflies, and moths, you get these really, the really big eye spots here. Just trying to remember, where was I up to? Oh yeah, so sorry, I was just trying to remember the name of the study that this was done with. So when they were tested, these the eye spots, they actually discovered that it's really important to have the eye shine, and then these spots obviously look like another predator. So the idea is that it looks like a predator of your predator. So if you have a small bird that's going to try and eat you, that these eye shines would make it appear to be an owl or something that would scare your predator. But the main impact of these eye spots is that they just startle your predator, giving you a time to escape. And what was really interesting was in a paper in '79, Pete Young, I think it was, actually surmised that most of the large moths and butterflies that have these eye spots are ones that feed on fruit, ripe fruit on the ground, and that those fruits are often fermented. And when they tested the butterflies, they were actually getting intoxicated from drinking this fermented fruit. And their thought was that because the moths and caterpillars were actually intoxicated and their reflexes were slowed, they needed this startle in order to have enough time to escape from their predators. So it's the escape from getting drunk spots. Okay, so that was automimicry, but now we're going to move on to Mullerian mimicry, which is named after the German Fritz Muller. And when I'm trying to remember the different types, I actually find it easy to remember that the Mullerian, named after the German, is the truthful form of mimicry. So basically, this is mimicry where all the animals are equally dangerous, or have sort of a warning that they can do something to harm you. So these are all local bumblebees, and they all have this similar pattern, so that any predator that attacks one and gets stung will recognize all of the other bumblebees as the same species, and thus able to sting, so that they gain mutual benefit by having this similar appearance. It's just a constant frustration for naturalists, because when I teach bumblebee classes, it always seems like it should be easy to recognize bumblebees because they're big and in comparison to most of our other bees. But unfortunately, they do such a good job of this Mullerian mimicry. The patterns make it hard to distinguish them one from another when they're flying around. But because bumblebees are a really common species and ever present in any meadow that you're going to go out to, they become a really good thing to mimic. And so now this is Batesian mimicry, which is basically, I can't hurt you, but I'm pretending that I can. So it's the idea of the sheep in wolves' clothing. So Bates was the English naturalist that noticed this phenomenon. So it's that the English one is the one that are telling the lies. So for me, that's like an easy cue to remember. So here we have some, all of these are different forms of flies. And of course, flies for the most part don't have any defense against predators. So they're a really common species to use these, deceptive forms of mimicry. We have the bumble fly, we have a mimic fly, we have the Narcissus bulb fly, all looking like I could be a bumblebee, I could sting, stay away from me. The bee fly, the Bombylius, is actually, really cool fly. And it's actually, pretends to be a bee so that it can scare off potential predators. But of course, it is also a predator itself of a lot of our solitary bee species. So bees are for the most part, not as big and fluffy as it's trying to appear to have its bumble mimicry. So Bombylius will hang out at flowers because they're feeding on the nectar themselves, but they're also on the lookout for solitary mining bees, mostly Andronida, that they're going to follow back from flowers to find their homes. And then the bee flies will fly, at low altitude over the ground, and if they see the tunnel entrances to one of the solitary bee nests, they actually just release their eggs to shoot them down the holes as they're actually flying over the top of them. So it's a pretty impressive piece of aiming that they're able to do. Kind of reminds me of that scene in Star Wars when Luke has to fire the missile into the Death Star and stuff. So but a lot of people, see these as the bad guys because obviously their eggs, when they land by the nest, larvae will hatch, crawl down into the nest of solitary bees, where they then eat the larva, the bee larva, and all the pollen supplies. So they are a parasite on solitary bees. So we also want to look a little more closely at the Volucella here. So Volucella are a mimic, but they're so good that they actually can also fool a bumblebee. All those other ones we were looking at, they were just trying to fool predators, jumping spiders and birds. But the Volucella is actually a fly that for its life cycle, it has to find bumblebee nests, and then it's going to crawl into the nest itself and then try and crawl past, all the bumblebees that are busy inside the nest to lay their eggs inside of the nest. So this is a bee that's trying to deceive the model itself. And that actually is a type of mimicry that has its own name as well. It's the Wasmannian mimicry. So once they've laid their eggs, they tend to, most of the descriptions of Volucella that I've seen, they think that the larvae of these Volucella flies actually just eat up all the detritus in the bottom of the nest, and sort of the old wax and, I guess like the larvae, that any that die and things like that. So they eat up kind of all the detritus. Some descriptions of them suggest that maybe they're not quite as beneficial as that, and that also they do eat some of the, still being used pollen wax and larvae as well. So, but I'm going to go with the fact that, for the most part, they're thought of as not harming the bees, but it's not surprising if you can't tell the difference between the fly and the bumble, because the bumbles can't either. Oh, sorry, wrong way. There we go. Okay, so you might think, once we start talking about all these mimics, what is the effect of all this mimicry on the actual model itself? So here's a really spectacular example of what a mimic, evolving to look ever more like its model can become. So we have the bald-faced hornet against the bald-faced hornet fly. And if you think about it, for the model, having a mimic can be a bad thing, because it means that if a bird comes along and eats one of these bald-faced hornet flies is going to go, that tasted really good, and it's going to try and eat the next bald-faced hornet it finds. So for the model, having mimics, Batesian mimics, can have an environmental cost, because it can mean that predators learn to look for you and to try and eat you. So for the model, the whole time, they're trying to evolve to become ever more distinctive and different from the mimics. But the mimics are trying to all the time catch up with their evolution. So this evolutionary arms race, just like, you know, gazelles getting faster and then cheetahs having to get faster to catch them. So the same thing is thought to happen between these models and mimics. But for some animals, it can be more complicated than that, because think about, what do the bald-faced hornets and all these different wasps actually eat? So they are predators themselves, and a lot of the things that they're hunting can be animals that are also hanging out in the same environments as their mimics are in the, you know, flower gardens. So it can be that their prey, if they're just hanging out and they're like thinking, oh, it's okay, that won't hurt me, it's just one of those harmless flies, and then that it can mean that it's actually easier for bald-faced hornets to do their hunting. So there's a really complicated relationship that happens between a lot of the, you know, all these different animals that are flying around looking like bees and wasps in the flower garden. Just because, like, it's one of those things, once a story starts on the internet, it's like it can never disappear. And for me, it's absolutely amazing that the research to show that monarchs, that viceroys are not Batesian mimics of monarchs was done in 1991. But if you like Google viceroys on the internet, like half or more of the hits that you get will tell you that the viceroy is a Batesian mimic of the monarch, so that it is, you know, not distasteful like the monarchs are. So we all know that monarchs are eating milkweeds, and they're storing those cardiac glycosides in their body, and that makes them distasteful to vertebrate predators. But in fact, so, you know, people like going, oh, the viceroy is just imitating the monarch. But viceroys are actually feeding on willows, and they actually accumulate salicylic acids in their body. And this study that was done in 1991, you know, they presented the two different types of butterfly to birds, and found that the birds actually found both types equally distasteful. They would actually, you know, take dead butterflies and remove the wings and just feed the bodies to prove that, you know, the wings are having no impact on it. It's the taste of the bodies is distasteful, and the birds just like take one taste and either like vomit or don't eat it at all. But what is kind of interesting is there's yet another type of mimicry, which is the Browerian mimicry, which means that a species that mimics itself, where some of the species aren't as distasteful as others. And it's been proposed that monarchs are actually this type of mimic, because some of the monarchs aren't that distasteful. And in fact, the first generation, the ones that fly up from, you know, born in Texas and then fly north, that those ones are much more distasteful than the fourth generation ones, because of the types of milkweed that they're actually feeding on. And so the fourth generation monarchs actually benefit by mimicking the first generation monarchs, which is kind of a bit mind-blowing. Okay, so do you remember I said we could do this whole show just on butterflies, but we're not really going to, I promise. But a really good example of actual Batesian mimicry by butterflies is all the butterflies that copy our pipevine swallowtail. So the pipevine is distasteful, and there are lots of mimics. We have the spicebush, the black swallowtail, the blue spotted purple, sorry, and the eastern tiger. So if we just want to look a little bit more closely at the blue spotted purple, a study was done on these to look at how effective this Batesian mimicry is. So I don't know about you, but it's kind of interesting that of those different mimics, I have all of those in my yard, except for the pipevine swallowtail. That's the only one that I've never seen in my yard. And it's like, I always wondered, how does the mimicry work if the predators never actually meet the model? And some people did some research on this, and they used actually citizen science data of information collected from people going out and doing butterfly surveys. So this research all comes from citizen science, which is kind of cool. And what they discovered was that everywhere that the pipevine swallowtail is present, then all versions of the blue spotted purple is the subspecies that we think of as the mimic. But once you get into the area beyond where pipevine swallowtails are, we have this other subspecies, the white admiral, is actually the only kind that's found. So even where the number of models is really low, it's actually still advantageous to be mimicking that model. So we don't find any of the white admiral versions where the pipevine is also present. So if we go back, the other thing that's really interesting with this mimicry is when we compare the eastern tiger swallowtail, because you might know that there's two different morphs of the eastern tiger swallowtail. So if you look at the black morph closely, usually when you see the light shining through it like this, you can actually see the tiger stripes, because of course the other morph is the yellow version. And what's really interesting is that the eastern tiger swallowtail doesn't show the same pattern as we see with the white admiral and the purple spotted blue. So all male eastern tiger swallowtails are yellow wherever, even in the south of the range where pipevine swallowtails are really common. So the black morph that's of the females, that's imitating the pipevine, it is only present in the areas where the pipevine swallowtail is present. As you get far enough north, you start to just get the yellow morph of the eastern tiger. But one of the things is, when we're trying to explain, they should all be black. Why do we still have yellow versions of them in the southern areas? And when we have these things that are hard to explain in evolution terms, it usually means that there's another influencer, and that influencer is going to be the sexual selection. So for me, I find it hugely ironic that the tiger swallowtails really prefer blondes. So it's the yellow are found to be more sexually attractive. And you might have seen this in your yard. You'll see the yellow tiger swallowtails flying all around each other, doing the dance of courtship. And sometimes there's the black swallowtails, tiger swallowtails are just sitting on the sidelines, watching. So there's two competing influences on what color morph to be. If you are a black eastern tiger swallowtail female, you are going to likely live longer and be able to lay more eggs as a result and have more offspring. But if you're yellow, you're more likely to successfully mate because the male moths, butterflies, sorry, are going to find you more easily and be more interested in mating. And of course, for males, the only purpose in life is to mate. And so like all of them are yellow because, you know, as a black male, you just wouldn't find any girls that were interested in you. And it's just like this bizarre thing that happens between the two different morphs.
So Claire, we actually have a question about the red spotted purple.
Yeah.
Someone mentioned that they believe that the red spotted purple feeds on willows and poplars like the viceroy, and they're wondering if that could make it in the pipevine swallowtail Mullerian mimics.
Yeah, I actually looked that up as well because I was interested in that. But no, apparently when you when they you know, they get them dead and they take their wings off and they feed them, and birds don't worry about it. And it's just really weird. Some animals accumulate those toxins in their bodies and others don't. And we're going to meet some more where that happens as well.
All right. Well, that was the only question so far. So
okay. Right, so if you're a animal and you want to mimic someone and you're like, who should I mimic? I'm being very anthropomorphic here because obviously that doesn't happen. But the theory is that the animal you should choose to mimic should be one that is so yucky or so painful that you wouldn't you know, want to go near it as a predator. And one of the ways of judging like how painful making a mistake and trying to eat an animal would be is by using, luckily, the Schmidt Pain Index. So if you haven't read it, Justin Schmidt's book, The Sting of the Wild, is this great read. And he's a guy that developed the pain sting index by being stung by all these different insects to see which ones had the most pain. And in our area, the one that has the most painful sting is actually the velvet ant, which you might know is actually a wasp. It's a wingless wasp for the females. And it is a solid 3. That's how he describes it, which means the pain from being stung is bold, unrelenting. Someone is using a power drill to excavate your ingrown toenail. He has a really good description. As I said, his book is excellent to read. So this is a predator that, you know, really trains its an insect, sorry, that really trains its predators. Don't eat me. It's an incredibly painful sting. It has a really large stinger. You can hold them by their head and they can actually reach their abdomens around and still sting you. They have a very thick integument. Their exoskeleton is really thick, so even when they get grabbed by a predator, they usually escape unharmed because they got this like armor plating. And so their main predators are actually lizards that run around because they, are down on the ground as wingless wasps. And so they're really good at training lizards not to eat them. And it's when they did tests on this, if a lizard had ever encountered a velvet ant, then it would never try and eat another one. It was like a one-time learning for them, and there's no recidivism. So like even 30 days or 60 days or 6 months later, they still remember that lesson. Don't eat the velvet ants. And they reinforce this by having a sound as well. So they make sounds to warn you, I'm going to sting. Let's see if this works. So they make this squeaking. Okay, so they make the squeak and they also release a smell. So they have all that reinforcement: sound, sight, and smell. Don't eat me. Do you think like, this is the animal to mimic? And indeed, velvet ants have the largest mimicry complex in the entire US. There's at least 65 known mimics of ants. the red velvet ants, with about 8 of them in the eastern area. But what's really interesting is most of them are malarian. Even like the wasps here, spider wasps, they have a good sting, so they're malarian mimics as well. So there's really only a few of these jumping spiders, cardinal jumping spiders, and a few others that are Batesium. And the reason is because they're running around on the, well, they're not running around, they're walking quite slowly on the ground in bare areas, hunting for their prey, which is like bumblebee nests or like cicada killers and things, which means it's really easy for a predator to just sit and watch a velvet ant. And is that a velvet ant, or is that something I can eat? Which is not ideal. If you want to mimic something, you really want to mimic something that's moving around quickly, it's hard to get a good look at, and that there's lots of them. And of course, velvet ants aren't a very common because they're a parasite of a kleptoparasite. So they're not common. Instead, the best things to mimic are things that there's really large numbers of and move around a lot. And that's why things like the yellow jackets is just a great thing to mimic. So we have just tons of different hoverflies all trying to pretend to be these you know, a yellow jacket, or the many other stinging insects that we have in our gardens. So they just have the biggest, like, in number of Batesian mimics. Right, I wanted to like cover a few animals that have like more interesting ways of mimicking, and one of them is this the walnut sphinx moth that actually makes a cry. Now, I really want to say, like, no animals got hurt during the filming of this. I certainly hope they didn't. So let's listen to what happens when you catch one of these moths. So when you pinch, so imagine if you were a bird, like a chickadee or something, and you pinch one of these caterpillars, they make this deceit call at about 80 decibels if you're only, you know, 5 to 10 centimeters away. So this is a pretty impressively loud call that they make. And this call was recorded, as you can see here. And what it's mimicking is actually the bird alarm calls. So Jessica Lindsay actually took these calls and played them at a bird feeder, and they interspersed like the call of the walnut sphinx caterpillar, and they randomly played it, or an alarm call from a chickadee, the chickadee's seed of alarm, and then just regular bird calls. And what they discovered was that when they play the alarm call of a chickadee, all the birds at a bird feeder just flee, because it's like the sign, there's a hawk coming or there's a cat coming, so everyone just like disappears into the bushes. And when you play the noise that this caterpillar makes, the birds do the exact same response. So when any bird tries to like eat one of these caterpillars, they hear this noise and it's like the alarm call, there's a hawk coming, and so they'll flee, and the caterpillar gets to live another day by crying wolf. Another ones that do different auditory calls is there's a whole load of moths, the tiger moths, that actually, once we got the ability to record really high frequency sound, we discovered that they were making really high clicks. And that when bats, their main predator, fly close to them, that the bats would like move, change their direction really suddenly away from them. And the initial thought was that the clicking noises that they were making was actually a jamming, that they were making the clicks at the same frequency as the bats, and so distracting the bats, and that they would move away. But once it was like studied with slow motion cameras, what they actually realized is it's actually, they're making this announcement that this is me and I taste bad. It's an aposematic signal that they're making. And so they're able to do this. They have timbals on the side of them that make like a click noise. So this is slowed down so we can hear it, the frequency. And so once the bats come to about 3 feet away from them, they start the clicking. There's the bat, it clicks, and then you hear the moth clicks. And the bats actually learned that those clicks mean I taste bad, and they don't eat them, because these are the dog-bane tiger moths are eating those cardiac glycosides and are distasteful. Now there's another closely related moth, which is the milkweed tiger moth, or tussock moths, that so many of us see on our milkweeds, and they are eating the same type of plant, and could also accumulate those cardiac glycosides like the monarchs and the dog-bane moth, but they don't. And it's really strange, that they don't, but what they do is they actually mimic the other tiger moths and pretend that they taste bad. And so when they, trained up these different bats, they were testing it with big brown bats and red bats, and they would give, for 5 nights, they would give them the distasteful moths that were giving the true signal, I taste bad. And then they would switch in and present the bats with the milkweed tiger moth. And the bats would initially all just go, I don't eat moths that click, they taste bad. But when they removed, the clicker from those moths, then the bats eat them. They don't actually find them distasteful. And even without it, after a few days, the red bats, which are a moth specialist, were able to start distinguishing between the true warning signals and the mimicry warning signals. So after about 5 days, this is what started happening to the milkweed tiger moth. And there's the red bat. But the big brown bats actually never learnt during the test period. They always just accepted it as a true signal of I'm distasteful. Okay, well, I'm moving along. Okay, so I'm supposed to be talking about insects, but this is a spider, but it's mimicking an insect. So it's kind of cool. We have some jumping spiders here in Maryland, Virginia, that imitate being an ant. Now we all know ants are pretty badass. They taste really bad of formic acid. If you attack one, there's 1,000 friends are going to come and attack you. So lots and lots of predators just avoid ants. They don't want to mess with an ant. So it seems like a really great thing to try and pretend to be an ant. But you can't get too close to the ants, because the ants can tell what's an ant by the smell. So you can only lurk close to ants, but not get too close to them. So to impersonate being an ant, if you're a spider, you can change the shape of your body, give yourself a waist. You can grow big back legs so that you have a more ant-like shape, like this one over here. But of course you have 8 legs and you don't have an antenna. So what they do, if we can play this little video down here, think without sound so I can keep on talking, is every 10th of a second, they actually lift up their front legs to hold them up as if they're an antenna. And it was only when we can look at it in slow motion that you can actually see that they're lifting up their front legs. And they also walk in these random ways that ants walk in. So they're able to both mimic the style of walk and to imitate having antenna. So they did some testing on how well good was it fooling jumping spiders. So you have to give a little bit of interpretation to what happens in this video. So they're going to test the main predator of the small jumping spiders is a bigger jumping spiders. So we're going to see if it's going to try and eat them. So we're going to have, they made these little videos of jumping spiders. So they would have regular jumping spiders, and then this is the video of the jumping spider pretending to be an ant. So it lifts up its antenna and wobbles its abdomen. So the first time it walks across, it's the jumping spider pretending to be an ant, and then we're going to get the jumping spider just being a jumping spider. So this one's pretending to be an ant, which is kind of interesting, but I'm not going to eat you. And then up, you're a jumping spider. So then you try. So this one I really can say no animals were hurt during the filming of this video. Okay. Oh, that's all defensive mimicries. Don't eat me. We're going to move on to some of the ones that are trying to catch some food. So kind of one of the changeover ones for me is the robber flies, the Laphria type of robber flies which are very good mimics of bumblebees. And certainly they do eat bumblebees. This is actually one of the hanging thief robber flies eating this bumblebee. But it's hard to know for me whether really looking like a bumblebee helps them to catch the bumblebees. Maybe they can lurk closer to them without the bumblebees taking alarm. But I kind of feel most of the time the bumblebees are just in their own little world. And so for the most part, it's probably actually a defensive one to avoid being eaten themselves. The mimicry is really good. You can actually look at these different robber flies, the Laphria, and see which bumblebee they're mimicking. So this one, which I think was taken in Baltimore City, looks like one of the American, the Bombus pennsylvanicus or Bombus auroricus type of bumblebee. Where's the one up here? Laphria secreta, actually is found in just Western Maryland, and it looks more like Bombus vagans, the bumblebee that's found in Western Maryland. So they're mimicking their local species. But the ones that are really cool, one of my favorite stories is the fireflies. So we might know that fireflies produce light. But we think that light, the bioluminescence, was actually originally just an aposematic warning that I taste bad, because all the larvae have this glow, even though, it's not used, obviously, for sexual attraction during the larvae stage. But in the adult stages, obviously, it's become a big thing, part of a form of sexual attraction. So one of our most common local species is the Phytinus pyrea, or the Big Dipper firefly, which you might know, it kind of flies in this like J, and that's why it has the name of the dipper, because it does the dip. So that's the males. They're flying across, showing off their prowess and how bright I can shine. And if you're a female Phytinus and you're really impressed by that, about 2 seconds after the male has done his shine, you actually do a single shine to show I'm really impressed, and the male will go, yes, and he comes rushing down, bringing a nuptial gift for the mating. Now, there are other local species of firefly. One of them is the much bigger, the Photurus ones. And the Photurus don't have a chemical that's called lucibufagin, which all the Phytinus have. So lucibufagins are toxic, and so they are the things that, make you distasteful, that the aposematic warning is all about. So Photurus don't have that. And if you're a Photurus mom, you want to give your kids the best chance you can in life. So you want to give them some of these lucibufagins, but you can't produce them yourself. So they have a very sneaky way of getting these chemicals. So initially, they will use their own pattern of lighting to attract a male of their own species to mate. But once they've mated, the Photurus females will then actually mimic the response of the Phytinus females. So a Phytinus male will be flying over, doing his shining. He sees this response. He's like, yes, my lucky day. And he flies down, and the Photurus, who's about twice his size, will actually grab him, take that nuptial gift that includes lots of lucibufagins in, and then eat him, which is really unusual because most of the adult fireflies don't eat. And she can take those chemicals and add them into her eggs so that they have this protection that will help them against predators themselves. We also have, spiders again snuck in. So the spiders, the bolus spiders, they produce these long strings with sticky on the end of it. This is our toad-like, I think, bolus spider, the local version. And they swing their bolus round and round, and they're able to like catch moths flying past. But to get those moths to come within range, they release a pheromone of female moths, and of course every male moth in the vicinity finds that completely irresistible and will come flying in and actually get trapped by her bolus and eaten. There's a really great video on BBC where like the first time she misses, but the moth is like so, just finds it impossible to fly away from a female, so he comes back and she gets a second go at it. So yeah, they're using sexual mimicry to attract. And this is like a recurring theme, is basically using sexual attraction to be mean. With one of the worst ones being the blister beetle. So we have local blister beetles, and our local blister beetle doesn't do this. It's a blister beetle in the West that does this. Our blister beetles just have a few of their larvae that hang out on flowers, and then the life cycle is the same. But the blister beetle out west, they actually have a life cycle where the larvae emerge from their eggs, and in their first stage they're very mobile, and they all run up the nearest plant stem and form a big ball of about 700 or so of these first form of the larvae, and then they release a pheromone that smells like a female bee. It's the Habropoda bee. So male Habropoda bees go, oh, that smells so irresistible, and they come flying in thinking that they're about to copulate with a bee, and actually they discover it's this just completely disgusting ball of instar larvae that all just jump on board the male. The weight of it will usually bring him to the ground, but he recovers and starts off flying and continues his hunt for another female bee. When he finds that female bee, he will then copulate with a real bee, and all the larvae jump ship, get onto the female, and then they go take the ride on the female bee to the female's nest, where they jump off themselves, and then that's where they eat the bee larvae and all the pollen. So they're using it as a way of, getting into a bee's nest. So they're not so good. And I'm going to finish last one, I promise, is just looking at bees, because I did tell you that bees are my thing. So we have some kleptoparasites here in Maryland. So these are bees that eat, lay their eggs in the nests of other bees. So two of our common species are actually the Nemada. We have quite several local species, about 8, I think, Nemada in Maryland, and the Stelis. So the Nemada bees actually parasitize the nest of mining bees, the Andrena in the spring. Andrena bees, sorry. So they're going to try and sneak down this nest when the mother bee isn't there, and lay their egg on the pollen ball that this mother has spent so much time carefully collecting to feed her young. But it's really important that the bee doesn't know that they visited, because if they realize that the bee's been there, that they will hunt out for the Nemada's egg and try and destroy that. So when Nemada breed, the male Nemada, and this is still like not really understood why it's done like this, but the male Nemada, bees have pheromones on their mandula, and when they grab the female bee, they actually transfer these pheromones, which replicate the smells of the bees that they parasitize. So it helps hide the female. She has a smell that smells like this bee, so that she won't be smelt when the real mother returns. In some similar way, the Stelis bee parasitizes, a lot of these megalocyle, the leafcutter bees. And so Stelis bees have actually been seen collecting leaves and chewing them up and then smearing the leaf parts all over their body so that they smell of leaf to disguise their smell so they can sneak into the nest and lay the eggs undetected. So pretty sneaky behavior. Which brings me to the fact that when we talk about these animals that are deceiving and cheating and, you know, going into other people's nests and stuff, it's often easy as humans to see that as like bad behavior. But it's really important to remember, obviously, this is evolution. These animals don't have any choice. It's the way that their instincts tell them to behave. They can't choose whether to mimic or not mimic. It's like their instinctual behavior. And in fact, a lot of these things are drivers of diversity. So like those kleptoparasites, they tend to attack the most common species. And by reducing the populations of the most common types of bees or, you know, wasps, whatever they're parasitizing, then it allows rarer animals to, you know, be able to find more food. So it increases the diversity of habitats by having these different animals. So, you know, they all have an important job in nature, and it's just like fascinating to see how they live their lives. And so I'm going to finish and get to questions, and you can enjoy this. Can you see there's a spider? I'm a spider, don't eat me. So there's a little apple maggot fly hiding out as a jumping spider.
All right. Thank you, Claire, for such a wonderful presentation.